What's good, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Like I always say, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. If you haven't already, make sure you tell a friend, colleague, or whomever. And like always, the J. David Group is sponsoring this podcast. My company helps high growth software companies recruit top sales leaders and salespeople. So go to the jdavidgroup.com/hiring if you're looking to hire, or go to the jdavidgroup.com/looking if you're looking for your next big challenge. So one of the things that I've been passionate about learning during this pandemic is how companies are going to navigate their way through these economic waters and all the challenges that we're facing. And I'm able to have conversations like the one we're having today so that I can get this information and share it with you. So I'm excited about today's guest, who is Kenneth Merritt. He's a partner at DayBlink Consulting, which was recently named a top 50 boutique consulting firm. Kenneth is a strategy and transformation expert, and I wanted to have him on to give us his thoughts on how to run our companies better during challenging times and what we can expect on the other side of all this. Kenneth, welcome to Over Quota.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get into, hold on one second, let me just cancel something that I see on my screen that I don't really want to see. Okay, good. We're still recording. All right. So before we get into what I want to talk to you about today, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up what's going on in the world right now. We're recording this on June 4th. I think this is day 9, I believe, of the protests, or would be day 9 or 10 of the protests, and the outrage that's rightfully sweeping across the country as a result of what happened to George Floyd. And let me just give everyone my thoughts on this, I guess how I felt initially. So a couple things. First, I have never felt more angry. Just a sense of despair and anger that I didn't necessarily know what to do with. People that know me know that it takes a lot to get me angry, and certainly to express that anger. Several days went by, and the community that I live in is it's a primarily white community. My wife is white, my kids are mixed, and I've always just sort of been amongst mixed different races, right? Amongst my black friends, white friends, and the whole 9 yards. And I felt that I needed to express myself in some way, but I just really had a hard time just rectifying and coming to grips with what that was. But the only thought that I had is that because I'm an optimist, and because I always believe that in any situation, I can bring and find some good in people and hope that there will be some good in people. And so I put on Facebook recently that, if I were to ever find myself in that situation, that I would hope, and I would hope that the officer or whomever would see my phone and see my children on my phone and realize that he's not just taking the life away of a monster, right? He's taking the life of someone who, is a human, right? Is someone who loves his kids, someone whose kids love their daddy, whose wife adores him, and who adores his wife, and whose family, mother, father, and everybody really will miss this person if he's gone. And because the challenge is that we walk around in the skin, and if we can certainly rise to a certain level of success and reach the certain peaks that we're all trying to reach. But at the end of the day, all that officer will see is my skin. And so I can't necessarily avoid that, even if I'm a perfect citizen. And so if he perceives me to be a monster in that moment, I'm hoping that I would be able to pull out some shred of humanity in that person that will allow me continue to breathe and still be in the lives of my family. I'm personally going to get more involved in my own community. I haven't been all that much at all, but I'm certainly making an effort to be much more active, starting with meeting with the mayor, hopefully of my city, hopefully on Monday, to start talking about more, including more diversity and inclusion, not just from the police department, but also education, also economic, and everywhere else that we that we possibly can. So, the other thing too, guys, by the way, is obviously if you've been listening to this podcast, you know my ethnicity, of course, right? You've seen me in the picture, the whole 9 yards. But if you're hearing this, you might not be able to tell, but Kenneth is also a Black man as well. And I asked him, to just if he could say a couple of words too about this as well, and then we'll get into, what we want to talk about. Kenneth, your thoughts?
Well, Jay, I think you and I, as many folks, and I believe the good news is across our society, Black, white, other, all started with the emotion of the moment. The word I used to my friends who reached out to me, friends from all walks, was enraged. I had my own, anger that felt even more than anger, which is in many ways different than times in the past. And I don't know that that's a good thing, in that the need to change, even from me, right, has been as kind of a priority as it should have been, right? At this point in my life, I'm a father of two. My daughter is 21. Actually celebrated her 21st birthday a couple days ago. My son is 18. And we've had these conversations. I think the first time we experienced it and talked about it as a family was during the Trayvon Martin case, when they were, middle school age, back in 2012. And so maybe part of the rage and part of the pain that I feel is knowing that their lives are directly impacted one way or another, and that in the most indirect way, that the rules by which they have to live by are not that of pure equality and justice, to one day them ending up in one form or fashion in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so I probably have netted out with three things that guide me, right? It's one, and I believe this, and this is the conversation I'm having again, right? Whether it's on a business, as a leader of a firm who sits on a couple of boards and in positions that I have, right through to what I say to my friends is, this has to be much more of a priority than it's ever been, right? That there is no more sidelines in this, that everyone is either on the side of right or wrong. And for each one of us, that has to be the paradigm for which you start, right? Are you in this fight for quality, justice, and truth, and the virtues that this country was built upon, or are you not, right? Because we have not done enough in the past. I think the second thing is our approach to where we go has to be, driving towards systemic change, right? Because the issues that we face are systemic as such. And I'm a consultant, and so I always almost got to, I guess, think about it in consulting terms, that the way we go about this has to be in a systemic way of changing it. And then lastly, and I kind of touched upon this before, we should think about what each one of us can do and should do better, right? And do more of. I had a discussion with my friend, and a friend of mine who we've grown up together, and we've had so many life experiences in that. Being a Black man in corporate America for all these years, there's certain kind of rules that you play by. Some of them we impose on ourselves, and one of is not having this conversation with white people, right? And I think that was a mistake by me. I found that people of good faith ought to hear my point of view, so I can hear their point of view, and so that we are having the conversation now that we have to have. And so my commitment to them, quite frankly, to all, is that I no longer walk away from this important conversation. I lean into it to the utmost so that we can do what we need to do to fix it and not continue to make it a lesser priority.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, you know, I think too often we've had short memories and we just move on to the next crisis or the next shooting, and we riot and protest for a while, and then we just forget about it, and nothing, to your point, systemic changes. I'm hoping that this time is different, and I think we all just have to do our part, right? Absolutely. Thank you for that. All right, let's get into that. You mentioned consulting. Tell me in the audience a little bit about DayBlink, your role there, and the challenges that you help companies solve.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, DayBlink is a strategy and transformation firm, and we help clients solve their most complex digital solutions these days. And one of the things that we see happening in the business world, and it's really ramped up. DayBlink, as we stand, we're an 8-year-old firm, right? So we're still relatively new. We are based here in the Washington, D.C. area, but we serve across the country, and we actually have one of our major clients is Canada, so we're pretty proud about what we do. But our clients are Fortune 500 companies and government agencies, and in this world in business world, it's become a digital evolution, be it in the way you interact with your customers, in the markets you serve, or in the way you interact as an organization, i.e. work from home. The world's changing so fast that digital is the way that we have to go about improvement. And DayBlink's number one priority is digital and helping clients, be it through our cyber security offerings, our digital strategy offerings, finance and the CFO world, and turning that into a more technology solution as they support their clients. But transformation through digitalization is where we focus.
How many of your clients would you say were ready for this digitally in terms of the whole shutdown as it began sometime in the middle of March?
Yeah, I say that broadly speaking, and in my client conversation, I'll talk about those that have been clients for years, some I'm working with now, those that are more prospects than actual clients as well. I'd say about 20%, Jay, have been driving at the pace of digital change that's required of them. And many of them as such are having a hard time now as they navigate what this changing world has meant and what they need to do to meet the demands that they now have.
Why just 20%? I'm surprised at that. What have you seen as being the reluctance or whatever it is to sort of get them, more advanced, I guess, digitally?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? I think the notion of digitalization is still new to some, right? I think what it means as a real thing to every company is something that they've got to solve for. And the 20% has done a nice job because their customer base Their competition, their market demanded that of them. And, the other 80, it comes from effective kind of vision of your leadership team, the investment you have, and quite frankly, navigating, traditional challenges of investment dollars, growth, and all the other priorities that leaders face in companies. And where in this term, in this time, does digital stack up on the priority list? Is it, number 8 or 9? Is it number 3 or 4? Where is it on that list, that master plan, if you would?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was lower than it probably should have been. And the world we're in now just is making what probably could be 8 or 9 on your list now number 1 or 2.
That was going to be my next question, is that how has that changed? So let me ask you this then. If investing in technology was a prohibitor for them moving forward, how does that factor into what's happening? Meaning that obviously if the economy is struggling, companies struggle to hit their Q2 numbers, maybe their Q3 numbers, they didn't necessarily budget for any digitalization of things, but now it's a necessity for them to make that move. The question is that, are they doing it now, and can they do it given the fact that they might not have, or do they have to find money someplace else to make the investments in digital? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, simply put, the 20% are way ahead of the curve.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
This will come down to whether or not you have those investment dollars, and quite frankly, the leadership team and management know-how to navigate the environment. Let's make no mistake that the third quarter, that what we went through in the second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter, for many of us, it's going to continue to be tough. Mm-hmm. Because where you at one time had options around where your investment went, you have fewer options now. The demand for you is to navigate your limited resources and turn them towards reestablishing your business. Unless you were in one of those businesses, and quite frankly, there's some businesses who took off, who this environment helped, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're in those retail, let's maybe focus there a bit. And there's been for years the dichotomy and the pull for a retailer of what Walmart and that world of storefronts, big ultimate economies of scale, superior supply chain, broad customer base, brand does to and for retail, good or bad. Mm-hmm. And on the other side, the acceleration of Amazon and what it brings to the world in being at your fingertips, delivery, totally different customer experience, and how those two things were impacting your business. Mm-hmm. Well, if you lean more towards brick and mortar and in your business model, this environment forced you immediately to change, immediately to think about how you operate in a more virtual way. And, to answer your question, I think those who have the posture of dollars and leadership prowess to make that pivot for a world that is very different now here on June 4th than it was on January 4th, it will have to immediately execute upon the challenge that is.
Yeah, and it's safe to say that if they don't have those dollars, it's going to be simply unable to meet the demands, and then they might, they're at jeopardy, obviously, for, I don't know about going out of business, but certainly the business is going to be hurting for a while.
Absolutely. I mean, it ranges from a very slow kind of ramp up, perhaps in the best case of what your business was, or sticking with my retail example, your Neiman Marcus or JC Penney's who have failed.
Yeah, right. You mentioned management prowess and leadership a couple of times. I'm curious, um, like what kinds of, like what can management do and what can leaders do? Should they be doing um, to essentially affect all this change and to navigate through this effectively?
Yeah, I think every leader um, should think about digital for what it really means, right? I think they have to embrace digital and digitization, um, and understand that we are probably year 4 to 5, depending on who you ask, in what's probably a 15-year run of digitizing the world that we're in. And so it's not going anywhere, right? So as such, so one, you got to get in that game, but then two, you got to think about it as in the way it impacts your customers, if it hasn't already, as well as your team, your employees, those who are part of your organization. And really lean in to making sure that through this evolution, through this transformation that's happening, that you're learning from what others are doing, right? Perhaps, I kind of look at it as if you're not a retailer, and you can learn a lot from retail, right? At your pace and not necessarily theirs is way faster, right? But if you're a B2B business, or even a services business, to say, wow, I mean, that can that happen to my business? And if so, how will my customers behave differently, right? What will they demand of me? How will their preferences change in a more agile, digital, cyberish type of world, right? Secondly, what does that mean for my employees, right? Do they have new needs today? Like, for example, we're work from home now. How much of your work from home needs to stay kind of home because the preferences of our workforce and the pace for which things are done, right? I mean, how much lift and productivity did we get because people aren't having to commute, right? And so we now have invested in the infrastructure of Zoom and Skype and GChat and better equipment for working from home. Should we lean more into that and not necessarily go back to the way it was?
Is there any data on that yet in terms of the productivity, whether it's and how much it is up? I'm assuming it's up, or maybe, I don't know, maybe people don't think it's up. But
I have not seen any published studies just yet, but anecdotally, right, and talking to people from all different industries, different walks, different functions in a company, I think a lot of folks feel like they're working more, right? They are on the positive side taking advantage of not having to deal with the commute if you're in a high traffic area and those kind of things, and at the same time getting the benefit of getting to squeeze in 1 or 2 more meetings throughout the day.
What's the likelihood then when we come on the other side of this that leaders, right, and companies will look at what you just said anecdotally and maybe not be so fast to say everybody back into the office, right? If let's say, for instance, if municipalities, say that, yeah, okay, you can be at 100% occupancy, right? Come whatever date it is, right? How many organizations will actually do that, or how many people will actually adopt the notion that, okay, maybe you only have to come to the office a couple times a week? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my prediction here, okay, and it might be controversial to some, right? I think 8 of 10 companies are going to evaluate how they maintain some level of work from home. And I'm certain of that. And the other 20% is because so much of their business requires just far more kind of touch type of thing, right? I am certain of that because we have talked about working from home and digital tools and the like for years in business, right? Globalization, mostly driven by globalization and competition. I think this period in the COVID world that we've done has been a proof of concept that we could actually do it, right? And like so many things that businesses do, once you have a proof of concept that you can be productive and do that for less costs, right? Because having people be in an office and those overhead costs will just the smart fiduciary thing to do would be to look at where you can take some of that overhead out of your business. So I am looking forward to the next couple of years, this dialogue around what part of my organization can stay remote rather than, or go full remote and the cost cutting associated with it, rather than just kind of, again, bouncing back to where we were, 3 months ago.
You mentioned globalization and competition. One of my past guests, episode 19 guys, Ryan Burke, he was the SVP, or really head of sales for Envision app, and scaled them from around 35 people to over 850 people. It's a fully distributed company. And he said his culture was really work from anywhere. And it was predicated on what he called the 3 C's, which is collaboration, communication, and culture, and how to make all of that work. And selfishly, as a headhunter, as a recruiter, I'm hoping that that's the case as well. And the reason why, by the way, Envision App started it that way is because of what you just said. They were competing for engineers with Google and the like, right? And rather than competing with them all over in Silicon Valley, they said, okay, well, let's just see if we can find the best engineers no matter where they are. So to your point, right, in terms of cost savings, if you're a salesperson or you have a sales position open, maybe you find somebody in Idaho as opposed to New York City or Boston or San Francisco that can do that same job more effectively. So I think for me, it's pretty cool too as well, because they don't have to worry about candidate commutes as much anymore.
I think that's right. And I think you'll see that companies will learn how to attract candidates from all over using kind of more digital solutions. So, like Zoom interviewing, mm-hmm. right? And I think that's inevitable. And globalization was also another reason to do that, to your point.
Yeah, and I want to talk about sort of that new normal, so to speak, of hiring, training, and onboarding in a minute. But let me go back here for a minute because I'm curious about cost and allocating, money from one area of the business to another. And obviously, we're talking about digitalization here and how to do that. How are companies looking at their costs and sort of figuring out, okay, here's where we can spend the money and should spend money, and this is where we should reduce costs. Tell me a little bit about that. To me, that's a black box. I don't know how companies are looking at all that.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how this manifests going forward. But if I just assume that the lessons of the past will be part of the practices and processes we use, I think companies will go through that evolution of, for these costs, is it a shared cost or is it a kind of, specific cost? And if it's shared, how much more can we scale that type of thing, right? If it's not, can we scale it? If we can't scale it, can we kind of reduce it, right? And I also think that that will go for, all of your support functions, finance, HR, IT, all of those will continue to have to answer the question, especially in a work from home environment. How can we do what we have done traditionally in a more efficient and effective manner, right? And so that then they'll follow that process right through. I think the next wave of change, which again gets back to the digitalization of things.
Yeah,
I do look at.
God, sorry.
I was going to say I do look at, say, sales and marketing, which I think have done just a far much better job at this, right? Sales has led the way in digitalization of their processes, right? And so, and I think they know what needs to be shared versus, what I need to be an effective salesman for my client base and in my portfolio. And they've been able to deliver that on mobile devices and whatnot. So digitalization is far, further down the field in sales and marketing. It's got to catch up in those back office overheads. And then operations, I think for the most part, is in the middle. And that, I think that depends on what kind of business you are. If you're retail and some level of services, then you're under pressure and you got to do it faster. If you're manufacturing, I think it's a little bit of a different story too. So.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised when you said 20% of your longtime clients were really there in terms of digitalization, because I'm so steeped in sales and marketing with these technology companies who are frankly building technology to sell to other people that want to digitize, really. And I use sales enablement tools. Guys, go back and listen to episode number 1 if you hadn't. That's Ed Calnan, founder of Seismic, which is $1 billion sales enablement company. Then I also did an interview with one of the vice presidents of sales at Brainshark, which is another sales enablement tool as well. So yeah, those things are certainly important. And you're right. I think that sales and marketing are certainly further down the road than some of the other functions. Speaking of functions, you talked about IT, human resources. We can lump sales into this as well. How do leaders actually make that decision to reduce headcount when they look and say that, now we should be able to do more with less? How are they thinking about that?
Yeah. I think the cost pressures will be immense, honestly. Right. I think as businesses and as the economy continues to open up and ramp up, in the interim, every company function leader is going to have to ask the question, in the short term, how can I get more out of less? Right. And that in itself, and this is where, again, the winners will separate themselves. If they think about coming out of this as the definition of efficiency and effectiveness through not just people, not just by looking at your process, but accepting that the technology has advanced, and that if you do things different with the data and the information, that you can really redesign what you're doing in a way that meets kind of the world we're going to be in, right? I think leaders who place too much emphasis on the people side and not not retaining and upskilling people as they should, or those who just say, well, I'm just going to put in a new sales tools. I think they'll see a step improvement, but the type of improvement that is before us requires your real transformation by looking at what I generally look at is those 4 enablers: people, process, technology, and data.
When they're looking at a team of people of 10 within a particular function, let's just say however many people there are, how are they making the decision to say, okay, we're going to have to let this person go, but we're going to keep this person or these people? Is it just performance, or is it something else?
Well, I think I think it has to be both performance and capability, right? I think inevitably there's going to be technology kind of infusion and digital infusion in business. And the more that your people can be, equipped and have the prowess to do their jobs in a new way, the more lift you get out of kind of that person as opposed to a person who's not, right? If I have one bit of counsel to kind of every kind of one kind of mid-career at this point, say more than ever, more than you would have had to do 10 years ago, is think about your role and how you go about your everyday job in a way that is truly better, right? It's truly better. And if so, what does that require you to do? And own that a little bit, because that's the question that leaders have to ask as they make the choice where today I have 10, my budget says I got to be at 6. The 6 that are going to be there are going to, have it's going to be performance based, but it's also going to be capability and capacity to do work differently.
When you were talking there, it reminded me, I don't know if you ever see that movie Hidden Figures. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yep.
And that's a perfect example of where, the women that really shined and stayed, forget the woman who was the star, but ultimately she started learning how to program the IBM machines and didn't let the IBM machines replace her, right? And that's a perfect example of what you're talking about, right? In terms of, figure out how you can sort of intersect and inject your way into that capability and capacity piece and still be valuable human being to the company, right?
Yeah, and I think it's a great example, because at that time in our kind of business livelihood, right, it was, some of those computers were nice to have, right? And I think from that moment really into now, right, you could opt in or out as a company and an individual as to how digital you're going to be. I think that option is going away, and the COVID-19 situation, it has accelerated it more than otherwise would have played.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into the hiring and onboarding and training. I mean, what sort of challenges are companies facing and going to be facing? And then, how should they go about finding and adopting technology and the right business process to continue to perform and to shine?
Yeah, I and this one, Jay, kind of hurts my heart a little bit to say, but I actually think the companies, again, who do well here will understand the opportunity that they have, and that 3 months ago, hiring was a competitive situation to try to find the talent and meet your talent needs in a tight job market, right? But unfortunately, and this is the part that hurts, the job market won't be nearly as tight, right? We're heading towards 20+% unemployment, and by most economists and most people we look at, it won't go back to 4 or whatever it is. Your best case is going to be kind of 8 to 10, and I think that's a little bit of the job mix kind of thing. And talent, we were just talking about, like, from our 6 to 10, those are the left out 4, right, who've got to remake themselves. And so if you're on the hiring side and you're looking for ramping up your talent, the good news is you have more of a pool than you had before, right? And so the question now is not how can I get worthwhile candidates. It's now how can I weed through. It's going to be how can I weed through the candidates to find the right one to kind of fit. Back to your prior guest's way of talking about it, which I really like. Communications, collaboration, and culture, right? Mm-hmm. Because not you're going to have a choice of so many talented people who didn't go back to their old job. Now, okay, how do I pick appropriately from that pool? And by the way, how do I do it when kind of other companies are also at those kind of diamonds in the rough, right? And so you're going to have to get better, faster, and even use technology, Zoom, other tools that they are, to have that, to have those dialogues. I actually had, we as a firm had a opportunity that we're working through that came in this week that's a great one for us.
Mm-hmm.
It is helping one of our clients think about the first level of screening candidates being completely automated, right? So a true artificial intelligence type of, automated at a minimum, if it's not full blown AI, way of weeding through candidates and having the kind of first touch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. That hurts my heart a little bit. I better learn how to program those AI.
Well, I think, to your point, and to the point of a lot of our kind of talent acquisition and folks, what it will really do in many ways is make your touch points that much more important, right? Because we can get the I don't think we'll ever be able to get an AI program that will solve every kind of softer skill set need that companies looking for. And so, those tools will help you, I think, with your overall output, because the time you're spending now, and this is what I tell clients who are thinking about this path, is the time that their human leaders will be doing will be that much more important and valuable.
Yeah, and I think certainly, and by the way, thanks for saying that. And I think at the executive level, frankly, it's even more important really to have those, to be able to screen for those soft skills and to have those deeper level conversations than AI might not be able to do. But you're right. I think AI will really help to narrow the field a little bit, much more, and then really have a human being interject there and bring it home, so to speak. So
yeah.
What about onboarding, right? In other words, that's one side of it, which is the recruiting and the hiring. But have you seen or heard any challenges in terms of onboarding new employees, if people are actually still hiring, I guess? But going beyond this, when we do come out of this, and the new norm is that people aren't necessarily going to be there in an office where they can coach, train, mentor, and all that stuff. Like, how are you helping companies think through that?
Yeah, I have coincidentally, my prior kind of meeting today was around how we've had to try to do some onboarding in this environment, and it's been tough. I think the lessons, though, that have been kind of taught to us by like global organizations, as we kind of go back to that conversation, what I've seen work very well is that companies have their initial onboarding experiences be virtual, and be the virtual the activities that kind of play to the virtual, right? So walking through the company overview, right? Helping a new employee kind of navigate, an org chart, if you would. Training you can do in that environment. But the things you can't do are the real culture, introducing people kind of to their colleagues, right? That part that, quite frankly, we've all missed in the past few months. And so what I've seen those global companies do is, bifurcate the things they can do virtually and do them timely to when, new employees hit the market or hit the office, right? Office or work from home, whatever it is. But they didn't have these, let's call them conferences, meetings, or et cetera, to when they bring them from all different aspects. And let's play this out in a, to your point, completely opened up kind of commerce and economy. Why not, say 4-6 times a year, though we're onboarding people every other week, but 4 or 6 times a year, we're going to bring those recently onboarded people to at least one kind of culture building, get to know, celebration of you here event that can happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking too as well that, let's say for instance, a team happens to be in the same state, right? People aren't necessarily hiring across the country like my Idaho example, but are in the same state where it might be a 50 or 60 mile thing where, it might sort of give way to managers meeting with their team members, whether it be one-on-one or in group settings, just for something even smaller, like a lunch or a dinner or things like that, that maybe, frankly, we've taken for granted all these years that, management was getting away from those things and weren't necessarily having build, bonding relationships and building that sort of kind of a culture outside of the office that maybe people will cherish it more and will start doing some of those things, a little
Absolutely.
bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, I think it's something we'll have to think about as companies and as they again to this new world of kind of more remote than not, right? And so these processes will have to be solved for.
What kind of skills will sales leaders need to either use more of or frankly learn as we're talking about all this? And because obviously it's a different muscle that you're using if people aren't necessarily just going to be able to walk into your office and vice versa. Tell us a little bit about that and how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, I think this has been a real challenge, but one of enlightening of to those folks who are real, really good salesmen, right? I've got a couple of colleagues and friends and acquaintances who we've kind of shared stories, and I think the thing that I think we've all learned is that this new digital way of touching can still work too, right? That where we used to get in our car and drive around town and make sure, it's lunch here, it's breakfast there. And so before you know it, you're touching your 4 or 5 different places throughout town, different processes working at different stages of the sales cycle and whatnot. We're learning to do that here in this environment. I think, just as I was saying about onboarding, I think there'll be certain things that we will feel far more comfortable doing virtually, right? Versus getting in our cars and heading over. And I think that's not only because we as salespeople, have exercised those muscles. I think our potential clients and prospects are now kind of groomed in, hey, we can't, my days are long, so I can't really get out for lunch, or breakfast doesn't work because I'm taking my kid to school, or, hey, drinks would be great, but I'm I'm coaching this football team and I won't be able to. Hey, let's do a 30-minute time slot at 2 p.m. to have that meeting via Zoom, right? Or something like that. So I think the digitalization in those skill sets are muscles that we're using now. And I think it's a good kind of proof positive that we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely hear that. Also, just for personal relationships too, I'm having more meetings, just meeting my friends more, I think now.
Yeah.
We start appreciating those things that we've taken for granted so much, even people that live across the street from us in some cases.
It's true. And how many virtual kind of drinks have you had? That's kind of a net new thing, right?
Yeah, right.
It used to be we have to be at the bar to have cocktails, but hey,
right.
That you live cross town, I live cross town, or in another town, and there's travel and expense and other things that make it harder. What if we do it? You have a drink and I have a drink, and we pretend we're in the same room.
And reduce drunk driving all at the same time.
Absolutely.
How about that? How about that? All right. So complete this sentence for me. Enterprises that blank will be the ones that come out of this crisis stronger than their competitors.
So I'm biased as the digital leader for DayBlink Consulting, but enterprises that embrace the digital evolution that we're on, that we're in, and advance their organization and transform it for the world that we're heading, will accelerate and kind of win coming out of the environment we're in.
And what we were saying earlier, I think pertains as well, which is that in order to do that, right, in order to get going in that, they need to have be able to make the investment that they need in order to move forward, because without that, then it would be more difficult to do.
Yeah, and further to that point, right? Because I think sometimes the word investment scares companies, right? Because they kind of think about the big discussions they have to have with their boss, or with some investment committee to try to get the dollars to digitize. And let's be honest, in a tight business situation, investment dollars are kind of the first to go. I think what you have to do, whether you have big dollars or not, is find the time investment and mental investment and real commitment to it, that even if it's a bootstraps type and investment to get there, that you do, right? You can't let budget constraints stop you from digitizing, or you inevitably will not get there. And those who, because I'm not one who buys that those with the deepest investment dollars always win the digital race. Mm-hmm. It's those who make the right level of effort, commitment, and big and small tactical moves are those who will win.
I think all of my enterprise salespeople that are listening to this should take this clip of that interview and share it with your prospects for sure, because that's poignant right there. And also, which, as you were talking, it made me think about just landing and expanding, right? You don't need to get all of the money today, right? They don't need to make the entire investment for across the enterprise today. It can be a small group, almost like a test, if you will, and then scale it from there if necessary.
Well, it's a great point. And part of being digital is being agile, right? And agile is not, the proverbial, hey, it's going to take us, 3 years, and here's our big master plan. We need to set aside $40 million. We're not talking about that, right? We're talking about figuring out what you need to do digital. Yes, big picture, but what can you do in sprints, right? As little as 2 weeks here and there, right? And so we like to talk about digital, agile, org, and all these things in meaningful chunks based off where you are, and not some kind of preconceived, way of big transformation, like kind of old world.
That's right. That's right. All right. It's time for what I'm calling the rapid five. I had recorded a couple of interviews recently that people may have heard that I didn't include the rapid five. I'm not sure why, but we're definitely getting back to it now for this episode, which I'm not sure which number it is, but nevertheless, are you ready for the rapid five?
I think so. Let's go.
All right, here we go. What are you most excited about right now, either personally or professionally?
I'm really excited about the summer, right? I think the summer will be it's been such a tough end of winter and spring for us. I think as a society, a summer filled of collaboration, celebration, sunshine. I think we'll all be better for that.
Yeah, I completely agree there. What activity do you miss the most since being sheltered in place? Or activity?
This one, Jay, sounds weird by most people's account.
Okay.
I actually miss commuting.
Really? Tell me why. I have to know.
I miss commuting, right?
Yeah.
And that's commuting by the sense of driving, I live in the outskirts of DC, so it's, it could be 35 minutes to a meeting in DC. It could be an hour to my office, which is in Virginia, or it could be a day trip up and down the East Coast, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of miss it all because in those moments, I've actually, in 20 years of doing this, learned that those actually do become moments where you can get a lot of thinking, kind of quiet time that you wouldn't otherwise do, right? So it's a little bit counterintuitive because you think you're in a car and you think you're distracted by everything, but you actually get a chance to kind of, whether it's listen to a podcast like this one, which is great, or whatnot, you actually can go kind of learn something, think something, process something. And when you're working back to back to back to back to back in this work from home environment, you kind of you lose that a little bit.
I hear you, man. I have the biggest breakthroughs when I'm driving in my car going somewhere. If I sit in front of my computer to try to solve some sort of problem creatively, no matter how hard I try, maybe I'll have a breakthrough, but almost always if I'm driving in my car or shutting off a particular part of my brain, the other side turns on and that right brain comes back on. And there it is. And I'll also say that I've been running my own business from home, quote unquote, from home for almost 10 years. And one of the productivity hacks that I use on myself is, which by the way is one of the questions I'll ask you, is I literally don't work from home, or I wasn't working from home during all this, even though I could. So I would get in my car, I would drop off my kids at school, and then I would get in the car and I would drive intentionally, not just at a local coffee shop where I live, but I would drive 2 or 3 towns over to a coffee shop. And at some point I was just going to a different coffee shop pretty much every day. One time I was stuck in traffic and I was just laughing about it. I'm like, I don't have to be anywhere right now. And here I am stuck in traffic on the Southeast Expressway, like trying to, but to your point,
Totally.
Yeah, it tricks my brain into thinking when I get there, okay, it's time to go, right? It's time to work. And then when I come home from the cafe or whatever it might be, then it's like, okay, you can shut it off for now, so I
absolutely. So, good. So my answer wasn't weird.
Yeah, at least not for me, at least not for the person that you're talking to here. What keeps you motivated?
I am motivated by the times we're in. Mm-hmm. I'm motivated by this word I've used so much, digitalization, but mobilization, the different generations, the challenges that we have for how all of us who come from so many different kind of perspectives can collaborate, which is also why kind of you and I started this talking about, what's going on in the world around us. The optimist in me see all the people rallying for a cause. And though I wish it was always in positive rationales for how we do it, mm-hmm. The fact that we can come together in these times of, again, multi-generational, multicultural, and there's so much opportunity before us. And quite honestly, as corny as it may be, I want to be part of that.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Can you share a piece of advice or tool that helps you stay productive?
Yeah, I was thinking about this in the grand scheme of managing time, right? Where I am in my career, where I am in my personal life, I've learned that the priority of the moment should get your full attention, right? Because the downside of all the technology and all the things we have and all the stuff I was just talking about is you can easily get distracted. And I think to the extent, and I kind of hold myself accountable to this, that when I'm in that moment, I don't cheat that moment, right? That I kind of, if I'm in a conversation with you, I don't look at my phone, right? If I'm responding to an email, I try not to, answer the next ping, right? When I'm with my family, I try to, minimize. I try not to be distracted by work. When I'm at work, I try to, manage family and personal dynamics as, priorities, as they come. If it's not a priority, I push it out. Right. But my point is, in this world of so many things around us, we get too often are distracted, and we're cheating the moment. So my advice to anyone coming up is try not to do that.
Yeah, another thing I agree with. I actually started meditating a couple of years ago, and that's taught me a lot just about sitting still and being non-reactive to certain things that come about. To your point, there's so many distractions, and just trying to stay in the moment while you're in the moment, and then once you're done with that moment, go into the next one. It's kind of like, again, going back to George Floyd, but it's like breathe, take this breath, take the next breath, take the next breath, and don't think about the breath that you just had or the breath that is next 2 breaths from now, so to speak, right? And that's all we need to think about is just to breathe. Very good. And okay, the last one, which is a really easy one. What's the best way for people to connect with you and perhaps hire you and DayBlink to help them?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. But my email address at DayBlink, well, first of all, DayBlink.com. DayBlink.com. And I'm is one of the leaders of a couple of practices. You can find me there. Kenneth .Merritt at DayBlink.com is my email address. I'm also on LinkedIn, much there about my profile, and I pride myself on being very responsive. So any questions, anything you'd love to talk more about, I'm more than happy to do that, and would actually appreciate it.
Yeah, guys, and I would encourage you to, even if you're not in a position to hire Kenneth and his firm, just to reach out and say thank you, and maybe have a couple of follow-up questions there as well, because I certainly want to thank you. I know your time is valuable, speaking of time, and I appreciate you spending your time here with me on Over Quota.
Thanks, Jay.
Absolutely.